Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hey friends, I just wanted to pop in and talk a little bit about MBO behind the scenes. When I entered the yoga world as a teacher, I was surprised by how many yoga teachers were struggling with the business side of yoga. And that's why I created MBOM. MBOM helps yoga teachers and studio owners become entrepreneurs. It helps you to go from surviving to thriving with your yoga business. I am on a mission to change the yoga industry, to teach yoga teachers and studio owners about the business of yoga, and to help you feel more confident, successful, and abundant. After releasing hundreds of podcast episodes, I want to create content that dives deeper into helping yoga entrepreneurs thrive and elevate their businesses. This is where MBOM Behind the Scenes comes in. Each week, you will get bonus content from the weekly guest or myself, diving deeper into how you can take the teachings and apply them to your business. This podcast is designed for yoga teachers and studio owners who are ready to take it to the next level. If you enjoy MBOM and have been looking for an affordable way to learn more, this is it. For the cost of 2 lattes per month, you will get never-before-heard content that you can't access anywhere else that will give you tangible ways to dive deeper into your yoga business. If this sounds like something you're interested in, let's dive in. Head on over to patreon.com/MBOM yoga and sign up to get behind the scenes now. Once again, that's patreon.com/MBOM yoga to get all the exclusive behind the scenes content. I'll see you there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the MBOM podcast. I am very excited for this episode of the show. This episode is brought to you in part by Offering Tree, an all-in-one, easy-to-use online business platform that I've been working with for years and that you've probably been hearing about for so long at this point. And if you've been looking to save time, energy, and money, make sure you check out Offering Tree. And of course, don't forget to grab your discount at offeringtree.com/MBOM. I've been working on something pretty cool with Offering Tree over the last couple of months, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about that as we head into the episode. But until then, let's dive in. This week on the podcast, I am really excited to be joined by Andrew Singer. Andrew is a yoga teacher, and he is based out of Medellin, Colombia. He is also the owner of Flying Tree Yoga and Yoga Internships Colombia. And I've actually been following Andrew and his business for a number of years, waiting for an opportunity to go down to Medellin to practice at Flying Tree Yoga or to maybe take one of their teacher trainings or immersion programs. And I'll talk about this a little bit in the episode. But with the pandemic, one of the silver linings was that all of their programs went online, and I was actually able to take one of their Spanish language immersion programs from where I was living in Mexico. So it's really cool because I was able to learn how to teach yoga in Spanish from the comfort of my home without having to travel. And this is really what Andrew does. He runs a yoga studio that's taught both in English and Spanish, as well as has these great programs for people who are passing through Medellin who want to learn to teach yoga in Spanish or do internship programs where they are teaching more. And I just think he has the most interesting business model. It's super, super cool to hear about how he decided to start this, how he ended up in Medellin, what he's learned along the way, and so much more. So I'm really excited for you guys to dive into this episode. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And without further ado, here is Andrew. Welcome to the podcast today, Andrew. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thanks so much. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive in with you. And I think a good place to start is, can you tell me where you're joining us from today?
Right. So I'm in Medellin, which is the second largest city in Colombia. It's a beautiful day out here, nice and sunny and warm. It's the city of eternal spring. So we kind of enjoy a pretty nice climate year round.
Yeah, yeah. I've only been to Medellin once. I was supposed to go a second time at the end of March 2020, which obviously didn't happen due to the pandemic. And it's this city that I'm just like, man, I never should have left this city. Like, I feel like had I stayed there in 2014 when I was there, I might still be living there. We might be doing this in
Yeah,
person.
it's such an amazing environment. I don't think I've ever seen a part of the world that's embraced kind of creativity and change in quite the same way that Medellin has. And you see that in everything from the public infrastructure projects. The way they put these cable cars that go up in the mountains into the neighborhoods. To sort of have better access, better connectivity around the city, to the new plans. They're thinking about maybe converting the airport in the center of the city here into like a massive kind of central park. So there's always something interesting and exciting going on here, and it's a great environment as well as an entrepreneur and as a business owner to be operating in.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm so excited to dive into that in a little bit. But before we get there, can you tell me a little bit about, your yoga story and how you first got into yoga?
For sure. And I think that as many people, I got into yoga during a stressful period of my life. I was working out in the States, and it was a wonderful job, in a liberal arts college. But I was quite isolated, I suppose, in many ways in the community up there in the mountains. And one of my relationships had just ended, and I think I thought to myself, what is the last thing that my ex partner would expect from me right now? And that was a yoga class. And so I went along to this beautiful little yoga studio up in the mountains there. And I got introduced to yoga along with mindfulness meditation. So I don't know if you're familiar with the course by John Kabat-Zinn.
No, I'm not.
Um, so he's a doctor. I think he works out of one of the hospitals in Massachusetts, and he developed this course of sort of mindfulness techniques and yoga techniques to help people deal with things like chronic stress and chronic pain. And for me, that was perfect, because I think, I'd always grown up in this very intellectual kind of background, the sort of the university that I went to as well. And so I had a very kind of mind-based approach to life that, required everything to be kind of backed up by evidence and study. And I still have that part of myself, but it meant that, maybe I was a bit kind of resistant to some of the more spiritual approaches to yoga. And so it was nice to have this course that was, led by a medical doctor, and that was being used to help people work through some of their issues with stress and pain.
That sounds amazing. And so you went there, and did you kind of feel like, hey, I'm hooked on this right away? Or was it kind of like a slow build getting into the practice more regularly?
I think it was a bit more of a slow build. I think it felt more of just this kind of spiritual lifeline for myself. Um, when I was growing up, I grew up in the Christian faith. I went to church regularly, and that kind of side of me fell away. I think in my late teens and early 20s, I began to question a lot of the teachings that I'd come across, and it kind of left a bit of a gap and a bit of a vacuum. And so I think more than anything, it just became this kind of like little spiritual refuge that I could go to a couple of times a week. And, the asana practice was nice as well. It helped me to kind of work out some of the tension and stress in my body. But I think it did take me a few years to really kind of, understand what yoga means, right? It's not like yoga kind of, it's this one monolithic thing with one approach. And I think it took me quite a few years to really kind of find my niche in the yoga world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I can definitely relate to that personally as well. And I feel like the more I learn about yoga, the more I recognize like how deep the well of learning is, and that I'll
Hmm.
never really be done learning from the practice.
Exactly. And
I
that's a
love,
great thing, right? To be able to have a lifetime's learning ahead of you, and to be able to kind of pick and choose where your passions take you.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. When I first realized that, which was during my 200-hour yoga teacher training, I felt a little bit overwhelmed at first. And then I was like, no, this is
Hmm.
like a beautiful thing because I'm probably never going to get bored of this. Because if I get bored of one aspect of it, there's so much that you can dive into in these different branches of yoga or different practices or different lineages. And I felt like that was kind of
Hmm.
reassuring for me.
Right. And I think that, that's kind of the purpose of the 200-hour teacher training, right? It's kind of yoga 101, if you like. It's this sort of introduction to, okay, what is yoga then? What are all of these different branches that you might choose to pursue in more detail? And once you've got that initial 200 hours, it's really a question of figuring out, where do you want to go with your practice and where do you want to go with your teaching?
Absolutely. And so for you, at what point did you decide that you wanted to take your first teacher training and become a yoga teacher?
So, I mean, I've always been attracted to the process of guiding and teaching. I mean, I think ever since I was a kid, I love kind of explaining things to people and teaching other kids how to do things as well. So I think I always had that special connection there. And in my adult life, I was lucky to spend about 5 years before I took my teacher training, teaching things that I was passionate about. So I taught what's called classics, so ancient culture, ancient literature, ancient languages. I taught Latin, I taught ancient Greek. Um, and so I think the transition to teaching yoga was a pretty natural one, right? It was just a question of, look, well, here's this other passion of mine, one that I feel like I want to understand a bit more, and one that I want to share with other people. But I think for me, I've always been interested in more than just the asana practice. I mean, asana is something that's wonderful and important in my life, but I think I like to take a bit more of a holistic approach to teaching yoga. So today I teach as much history, philosophy, breathing techniques, and meditation, um, as well as things like use of language and sequencing as much as I do the physical practice.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can also relate to that as well, which is really cool to hear. And so tell me a little bit about like your teaching journey. Like, did you start teaching, right away? Were you like, hey, I want to do this as a career? Like, what did all of that look like?
Yeah, so I was very lucky after I did my original teacher training, which I took in Thailand back in 2014. I was very lucky that I got offered an internship position out in Bali. And I went to this wonderful retreat center that I highly recommend to anyone who goes out there called Bali Silent Retreat. And they gave me the opportunity basically to work for a month, to lead meditations, to guide one or two yoga asana practices a day. And I think having that, month-long internship experience really just gave me the space to answer that question. Is this something that I want to do professionally? Is this something that I should invest more time and energy in? Or, should I maybe kind of go back to pursuing other methods of teaching like I'd been doing in the past? And, I think I just got such a wonderful feedback and such a lovely experience out in Bali that I decided, okay, this is something that's worth my while. And I think I have enough kind of talent in terms of, making classes and sharing my message that I'll continue doing that.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And I actually did my first 200-hour in Bali. So I've never actually
Hmm.
been to Bali silent yoga retreats, but I've heard of it. And the last
Hmm.
time I was there, which was in 2017, my husband and I were actually going to go and do like a program with them, but the dates and times and stuff actually didn't work out, unfortunately. So it's
Hmm.
still on my list to go check them out and everything that they're up to. So that's really cool to hear.
Sure.
And so after you were in Bali, where did you go from there? Like, did you go to Colombia after that, or is there a bit of a journey
I
getting over to
did.
Colombia?
I mean, there is a big journey between Bali and Colombia. They're
Yeah, I
literally
mean,
opposite
most of the
sides of
world.
the earth. I think literally, if you put like a pin through the middle of the earth, you would come out in Colombia from Bali. So yeah, it was. But it was a direct journey, pretty much. I'd been living prior to doing my teacher training. I'd been living in Spain, and I had a lot of close friends from Latin America in Madrid, and they kind of planted the seed right in my mind. Um, and I think, the whole kind of process that brought me out here was kind of rooted in the experiences a little bit of my own country. I mean, I adore the UK, but I think I do find the mindset sometimes a little bit maybe insular. People kind of have a certain way of thinking, of looking at things, of relating to the world around them. And, once I'd sort of moved away from that, I had this, opportunity to teach and work in the United States and, also to teach and work out in Spain as well. I kind of had nightmares that I'd have to kind of go back to this, 9 to 5 grind underneath the gray skies of London. And, I couldn't do it. So, yeah, I think I was just open to these ideas of moving around the world. And the Colombians convinced me that Medellin would be a great place to continue my journey.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. And I'm curious, like getting to Medellin, did you feel kind of like, okay, I think this might be home, or it was like maybe I'll stay here for like a couple of months, maybe a year, kind of like feel things out? Like where was your mindset kind of at
Mm.
when you arrived in Medellin?
So I think, for some time by that point, I'd been living in the mindset that you can't really predict things, 3 months down the line, let alone, 1 or 2 years ahead. And I think the last years taught that as well, right?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I was really just kind of curious and open-minded just to kind of see where things went here. I didn't really know anything about Colombia or Medellin before I arrived, and I just arrived in the right place at the right time and met the right people, and ended up meeting my now wife. Within about 3 months of arriving in the country, and there was just a lot of things that kept me here, a lot of really exciting projects and plans.
Yeah, for sure. And so, obviously you meet somebody who becomes your wife and you're like, okay, I can stay for that. Tell me about like the
Mhm.
yoga side of things. Like, were you teaching kind of right away or,
Mhm.
how did that evolve and how did that evolve into starting a studio?
Right. So it was very organic. When I arrived here, I moved to a neighborhood called Laureles, which is it's really nice. It's kind of this wide, leafy kind of suburb of Medellin. There's lots of cafes. It's very pretty. Lots of flowers. Um, and somebody in my hostel told me, "Hey, there's this American lady called Sierra." Who's running a new yoga community from her house about, sort of 3 or 4 blocks away. And this place, of course, is Flying Tree Yoga. So I came along, and I discovered this project, which was originally started by somebody else. And so I met Sierra. I began to collaborate with her. I was teaching just kind of volunteer yoga classes for the first year or so in this space. And I think that's a really great thing for, first time teachers to do, just to kind of get their sense of self identity, right? To kind of know what kind of message they want to share, what kind of style they want to share. And I began to collaborate with her on these different kind of projects as well. Um, and amongst these were the seeds of, what became the internship program for yoga teachers and the Spanish language course for yoga teachers as well. So with the background that I had in education and language teaching, I was able to help, flesh these things out into something that was much more complete and structured. And when Sierra eventually, after a year or so, decided to, that she'd kind of, put the energy that she wanted into this project and that she wanted to move on and do other things, she sold the business name to me, and I think I, from that point, just built Flying Tree into something a little bit more stable, a little bit more solid.
Yeah, that's so cool to hear. And so how long have you been running the business then?
So the business is 7 years old, and I think I must have been running it for about coming up on 6 years, 5.5 to 6 years now.
Okay, cool. So you came in like pretty early on with the business that you'd started.
Mhm. That's right. I mean, it was really just the seeds of a project when I arrived here. It didn't look like a studio. It didn't kind of feel like a studio. But in many ways, I think that's kind of the right way to go about, opening a project like this is to just kind of get something out there. It doesn't need to be in this complete and perfected state for you to start experimenting with a new idea and to start learning all the kind of the lessons that you can only really learn, on the job, as it were.
Yeah, I really love that. I think that that's a great kind of takeaway and business lesson for people listening. Like sometimes we kind of have these ideas and we sort of sit with them, letting them percolate. And then as we create them, we want them to be perfect before we put them out to the
Exactly.
world. And I think it's like sometimes we don't really know like what our community or our students need or what
Mhm.
even we need as business owners until we just kind of put something out there and like let our community kind of help us grow it.
Exactly. And I mean, I think that's the point. You put something out there simply, efficiently, and cheaply, and it's much more likely to kind of grow itself organically. It'll end up attracting hopefully the right kind of people who have the same, who share the same kind of vision, and who will help you grow your community in kind of the way that you would like to see it flourish. But yeah, I mean, for
Mhm.
sure, I've definitely met a lot of people who, either they have these ideas and they just kind of they doubt and they hesitate and they wait for their vision to be perfect before it gets out there, or conversely they take this huge financial risk. They take out sort of loans from either from banks or from family members without really kind of having any idea if it can work or not. And sometimes those stories are a little bit heartbreaking, where people end up, losing this cash that, their loved ones have maybe thrown into their project. And, they end up having a terrible experience as a result, and it's very sad to see that happen when maybe they could have gone about it in a bit more of a kind of a simple and cheap way, and done the experimentation up front.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And so for people listening who aren't, totally familiar with everything that you do at Flying Tree Yoga, can you kind of walk us through like how you set up your business and the programs and offerings that you have?
So I think one of the important things for me with a business is making sure that it has a very diverse offering, right? I think in terms of the longevity of a business, that is really something that is super, super essential. And we've seen it with a lot of yoga communities that have maybe collapsed during the coronavirus pandemic, that often they're communities that rely on, maybe just one or two things, right? Like in-person classes, for example. And of course, when those classes are taken away, the business will very quickly collapse. So for me, it was quite important to have quite a diverse offering of different things in Flying Tree. So we have yoga classes both in English and in Spanish. So we can cater both to the local Colombian community and also to the international community of travelers who come through the city as well. We also offer some kind of massage services, the sort of the usual stuff that you find in the yoga studio. But then I really wanted to make community Flying Tree into a project that had a focus on education. So obviously offering 200-hour teacher training programs, but also branching out and offering other educational opportunities for yoga teachers. So as a languages teacher, one of my pet projects as well that's been really, really surprisingly successful over the last few years has been a Spanish language course for yoga teachers. So especially people from the United States, but also from all over Europe, and Canada, people who want to share their yoga practice in a second language. Um, I decided to make a course that would help people basically get all of the tools that they might need to start on that journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I was just racking my brain. I'm trying to remember like when I discovered Flying Tree because I was on your email list for a long time, like a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
sort of just watching the program dates and stuff, just thinking,
Mm-hmm.
as a yoga teacher and somebody who lives, part of the year in a Spanish speaking country and has been like evolving their own Spanish. I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to kind of blend these things and be able to learn
Mm-hmm.
this part of the language. And yeah, I was watching the dates for ages, but I'm trying to remember how I discovered how I discovered you to begin with. It must have been a Google search or something like that, and then signing up for your email list because I wasn't teaching yoga
Yeah.
when I was in Medellin.
Well, I don't think there's many places around the world that offer language courses for yoga teachers. It's a pretty niche little market, I think.
Yeah,
But it's been
100%.
really fun. I mean, it's been super fun, and I've met a lot of people who they want to cater to a Spanish speaking community back home that doesn't really have much in the way of access to yoga, and who maybe don't feel very comfortable going to a sort of a studio environment. And they want to share these teachings, in Spanish, perhaps in an environment where people feel a little bit more comfortable in a community center or online. Um, so it's been really kind of amazing the response that we've got in terms of the interest and the passion that people have of crossing these cultural and linguistic barriers of sharing their teachings in second language, which it's a hard thing to do, right? But
Mhm.
people are really willing to kind of put themselves out there and give it a go.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, maybe we can talk about pivoting during the pandemic because I was finally actually
Mm.
able to take a course with you guys while I was in
Mhm.
Mexico. Obviously, you're in Colombia, thanks
Mm.
to the silver linings of everything being online. And I mean,
Indeed.
it's just incredible, like the way our brains kind of function with language. It's so interesting to
Mm.
me as a Spanish second language speaker, where there's, things that I do every day in Spanish where they come very naturally. And then
Mhm.
other things where it's like, okay, you got to like kind of train your brain to do that as a more
Mhm.
natural thing. And teaching yoga feels so natural now for me in English, but in Spanish, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, it's so slow and it's so choppy and it's like so clunky. It's like being like a
Right.
baby yoga teacher all over again, but then also kind of being like an elementary school student doing it.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that we try to address in the language course, right? Is trying to think, change the way that we think about language a little bit. We get so used to teaching with these, sort of very elaborate kind of instructions sometimes, which are not always 100% necessary. So one of the things that I try to help people with is really getting to the core of the message. What is it that you really want to say in terms of directing a cue or an element of a meditation or a pranayama exercise, and how can you express that in the simplest and most efficient way possible? And I think that once people get into that mindset of stripping their cueing kind of back down to its elements, they actually find that, hey, this is actually a lot more straightforward than I expected. And I'm no longer tempted to be kind of thinking in one language and translating it across into another, but rather building cues from the ground up in a simple and efficient way with the Spanish that I have.
Absolutely. It's such a like enriching and challenging process, but it's so
Hmm.
cool when you're able to kind of, do something in another language and have it feel kind of like successful. Like I think for anyone who's ever traveled somewhere where they've spoken another language, it's like you get the meal that you ordered and you're like, yes, this is actually what I wanted and I got it. It's kind of like
Hopefully.
that too, where you're like the people moved into the pose that you wanted them to move into.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's very rewarding. And, I mean, I think that a lot of people are very afraid, right, that they're going to be judged by their students when they start teaching a foreign language because their Spanish isn't perfect. It doesn't sound as fluid as they might like it to. But I think once people are able to kind of get over that initial discomfort and really just feel that sense of connection with their students, and see that you don't actually need a huge amount of language to make like a really profound connection with other people and for them to have a great experience in your class. I think at that point people can begin to settle down. They can really enjoy giving their classes in the second language and just enjoy that sense of achievement that comes along with, I did it. I led an entire asana practice in Spanish. That's awesome.
For sure. And I think too, I mean, we kind of mentioned this before, just with starting a business and putting it out there, but I think it's very relevant to this too, is like you do sort of have to let go of this idea of being perfect. And I think you kind of have to let go of that when you're new to teaching yoga. And then again, when you're teaching yoga in, a foreign language as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I haven't seen a perfect yoga class yet. I'm trying, but yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of it is about the attitude that you keep, right? And I've seen, for example, people who are not very advanced speakers, people who don't really have a huge amount of Spanish under their belts and who make, tons of kind of grammatical errors, but who are able just to kind of really relax and have fun. And I've seen them and their students have an amazing experience, that they can laugh together, they can, kind of play around during class. And, on the sort of the opposite side, I've seen people who are very, very fluent Spanish speakers who just get so nervous and kind of contracted around trying to deliver this, perfect class. And that nervousness, has its effect on their students as well. And the whole atmosphere kind of becomes uncomfortable. So, I think as with many things, relaxing and having fun is 50% of the work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like this has been like a big learning for me in my language journey of, like I don't speak English perfect all the time. I make tense errors and I say words incorrectly and stuff. Yet it's like my brain knows that I'm like an English first language speaker and that people recognize that. So I don't kind of have this ego attached to it. Yet it's like then I start speaking Spanish and I'll be like, oh no, it's not perfect and kind of have that whole mindset. And I mean, it can really trip you up because you get so caught up in like, I need to make this sentence perfect. And then you say something that's off and then you freak yourself out and freeze up. So it's definitely a
Well,
learning
as yoga
experience.
teachers, yeah, I mean, as yoga teachers, we're often the worst at following our own advice, aren't we?
Yeah.
We always tell other people, don't judge yourself so harshly and just, relax and breathe and enjoy. And then, it comes to our own language learning process and people get so frustrated with themselves and they're so harsh and self-critical and they don't just take a step back and look at what they've managed to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a pretty apt metaphor for life, that sometimes we get so kind of caught up in the struggles that we're kind of in day to day that we don't take the opportunity to kind of take a step back and just admire, what we've managed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a good reminder of like, of course, always striving for other goals can be a really beautiful thing, but sometimes we have to take a moment to kind of reflect back and see how far we've come on our journey because it's so easy to always just be looking forward and wanting more, more, more and not really recognizing like, look at where I was in my career or my teaching journey or my Spanish language journey like 1 year, 3 year, 5 years back.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Hey everyone, we're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about Offering Tree. Let's face it, online yoga is here to stay. And if you're already teaching online, you have everything you need to get started with an on-demand video library. A video library can be a real game changer for your yoga or wellness business. Let me just give you a quick example. My mom is a part of a yoga studio where she practices online. She had a super, super busy summer, seeing family and friends and traveling quite a bit. And she was telling me how if it hadn't been for the video on demand library, she probably would have put a pause on her membership. But because she could practice with the videos anytime, anywhere, she decided to keep her membership. I know that building out a brand new offering isn't always as easy as it sounds. And video can be really, really intimidating. That's why I'm super excited to tell you about a new course from Offering Tree that will teach you how to use on-demand video to scale your business. This course is less than an hour and it's completely free. Head on over to offeringtree.com/course to get started. In a little over an hour, you'll learn how to plan, launch, and maintain an on-demand video library that actually makes a difference for your business. The course helps you think through a strategy and pick which video model works best for you and your business. Then you'll learn what you need to record, edit, and upload your videos, plus pointers about pricing and marketing. Offering Tree is a software company that makes it easy for yoga teachers and other wellness entrepreneurs to sell classes, courses, and videos all in one place. This course is an amazing resource and it's free. So what are you waiting for? Go to offeringtree.com/course to get started. All right, now back to the episode. And so, obviously, the pandemic would have affected your business in a pretty big way. I think Colombia did a pretty hardcore lockdown in March of 2020. Can you kind of tell me what that was like, running a yoga studio and not just a yoga studio, like a business that kind of did depend on international travelers coming into the country and how you were able to sort of pivot with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's no yoga community out there that didn't have a really hard time of it. It was very tough. Um, I mean, I think even in my kind of worst sort of case scenarios in my mind, I'd never imagined that we were going to be, sort of physically closed for 6 months, basically. We had 6 months of not being able to use our space here at all. And I think, firstly, I was very lucky that I have a really lovely team here that I work with. They were extremely supportive. We all got together on Zoom regularly, to kind of cheer one another up and to bounce ideas around and just to kind of see, what it was that we could do. But I mean, even, the few weeks leading up to the lockdown have been very, very difficult because we could kind of see it coming, and we had to put all of these new health and safety policies into place and, start with the social distancing and all of this kind of, biosecurity stuff as well. And so it was a pretty exhausting few weeks of, just continually kind of having to pivot and change to whatever the new information was that was coming out. And so in a way, almost, when the lockdown started, it was almost kind of a relief, because we could see it coming for a few weeks, and finally it happened. Um, so what we were able to do, and I think, one of the benefits of being a small business is that you can adapt quite quickly to changing circumstances. It's not like you have these huge number of contracts and kind of fixed costs and so on that much larger businesses have to deal with. And so you're able to adapt to challenges a little bit more quickly. So for us, it was, a question of seeing how much we could put online, and in what way we could do it, that we were providing a sort of a useful service while at the same time providing the income that obviously the studio needed to continue working. So yeah, so part of that was having we did kind of free classes actually for about 3 months online, just to kind of give our local community here the opportunity to practice as much as they liked during their lockdown experience. We accepted donations for yoga teachers. People were very generous in those first few weeks as well. And then we put as many of our educational programs online as possible. So obviously the Spanish language course, that became this really very strong product for us during that time, when people from all over the world who had the intention, just like you did, of coming out at some point, in the future to Medellin to join us, suddenly had this time when they were twiddling their thumbs at home, and, they could commit to taking an online language course. So that was great. And we also ended up putting our teacher training online for a period of time as well. We gave a bilingual teacher training at one point to a private client, which was super challenging, but really, really fun as well. And so, yeah, it was just kind of seeing what we could do in order to keep things kind of ticking over until we were able to come back into the physical space again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I'm not happy that like anything with the pandemic happened, but being able to take
Mm-hmm.
that language course online was very much like, I think, a gift and a blessing, at least from my perspective, where I was that
Mm-hmm.
person, like every newsletter, like, what are these dates like? Could I get to Colombia? And it's like, okay, those dates don't really work. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is online now. Like these dates do work because I can just do it from the comfort of my living room and rejig my work schedule to work around it. So there's
Mm-hmm.
always silver linings, even in these kind of like really, I guess, sort of like crappy situations, which
Right.
I think the pandemic has been for a lot of us, but, little silver linings for our businesses and for us.
Well, and I think that, it's as much thinking about things from a business perspective as from a spiritual perspective. It's when things get really challenging that significant change happens, right? I know in terms of my own life, when I go through the most difficult periods in my life, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, those are the times when I have my own sort of breakthroughs in terms of my own personal journey. And I think it's much the same with the business as well. You can, if things are easy, you just kind of get stuck into a rhythm. You're like, okay, this is doing fine for me right now. I don't really need to make any changes. And of course, it's during these moments of great turbulence when you really are kind of forced, day in, day out to say, is there anything that I can be doing differently? Is there anything that I'm missing out on here? Like, how can we be creative? How can we be better? And obviously, I don't want to belittle, the struggles of a lot of other yoga studios here, because I know that like a lot of studios got thrust into circumstances where they weren't able to make it. And my heart absolutely goes out to those people. Because as a business owner, I know, the fear that's kind of there around kind of losing your baby, your project, right?
Mm.
So, I don't want to make light of the struggles that people have been through, sorry. But, in terms of Flying Tree, it did give us the opportunity just to try a lot of things in a different way. And, that with good luck, people who made donations to us to keep going, and, a lot of understanding in terms of our collaborators and people who worked with us, just allowed us to kind of get through that very difficult period. And it's not like we've come out the other end yet. Things are still hard. But, it looks as though things are beginning to pick up again now. And hopefully, the light is sort of at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully. And I was going to actually ask, like, where kind of things were at with the business. My understanding is that Colombia is back open for tourism again. You guys
Mhm.
can have people like back in the studio at this point.
Right. I mean, I think that the picture is actually pretty positive out here in Colombia right now. There are very few cases compared to, what it has been like over the last year and a half. The caseload is extremely low right now. The government has been doing a lot to reopen. We celebrated in person the Flower Festival here in Medellin recently, which is this huge citywide event over a week and a half with all kinds of live music and shows and parades and whatnot. And so that went ahead, and there really is more of a feeling of normalcy coming back into the community right now. Our Spanish language classes are full. Um, and we're starting to see more foreigners coming back into town as well. I mean, it's still slow. Europe seems to be pretty challenging to get both to and from.
Hmm.
But certainly in terms of tourists from North America and Canada, it's pretty straightforward to get down here to Colombia. And there's very, very little in the way of restrictions that, that people will find out here right now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I was noticing that Colombia was on a very, very short list of countries that are easy to get into right now. I know Mexico's on that list too. And so I think there's definitely, that could be like an attractive aspect for some people, on top of it obviously being, a beautiful culture, and Medellin's a very beautiful city. So I'm happy to hear that things are looking up and whatnot after a very long, long year and a half. And just that your business was able to, that you guys were able to pivot and have some success with that and continue running the business. Because, as you said, I think I've experienced, watching a lot of businesses close their doors as well. And it's so heartbreaking to kind of see that happening. And yeah, just happy to hear that, things have been going well and things are looking up. And so one thing I'm really curious about is just what it's like to, run a yoga studio internationally. I work with a couple yoga studios in Canada and the US, but I also live like a good chunk of the year in Latin America and Mexico. So I kind of have some sense for like, things work differently in these countries, and, you kind of have to adapt. So I'd love to hear like, what is it like to run this business in Colombia?
Right. So I mean, it is challenging for sure. I mean, first of all, you have to deal with a very different set of cultural behaviors. So people's spending habits, the way they communicate, the kind of social media that they use. What platforms should you choose to reach out to your clients on? What is the effect of local religion in the culture, right? Here we're in some um, very Catholic communities, and so yoga doesn't always sit very, very comfortably alongside religion. Um, so there's that on the one hand, and on the other hand, obviously, there's very different law. So in terms of the kind of the licenses that you need to operate, the tax system, when you need to pay contributions and how much they are. So, what I've noticed out here is that some foreigners tend to get very angry when things are not done in the same way as in their own country. They come with all of these expectations, and when suddenly Colombian law says otherwise, or people just act very differently culturally, they end up just kind of complaining very bitterly, which I think is kind of sad, and it's not something that I've ever really understood. So, in my own opinion, it's much better to try and just really kind of adapt with an open heart to the challenges of, the new place that you're living in, the challenges of being abroad, and at the same time, continually remind yourself about all of the positives about where you live. The beautiful weather, the really kind-hearted attitude of the locals who are in it as well. They don't always like the way that their laws work and their culture operates, but they're in it with you too. And instead of seeing this kind of like very us versus them sort of dynamic, which I feel that some foreigners fall into, rather trying to integrate into the culture, learn the language, make friends. Don't expect everyone to speak English with you. Try and understand where people are coming from and why it is that they hold the attitudes that they do. Maybe if they are always arriving late, there's maybe a reason for that. Maybe if they're kind of a little bit flaky, maybe there's a reason for that. So yeah, I think that you have to put in a certain amount of work when it comes to moving and integrating into another culture. And you can't expect that culture to adapt itself to you just because, you're used to things being done in a certain way.
For sure. I completely agree with that. And I think it's interesting too, because I'm sure I had some of this mindset when I was first kind of living abroad and traveling and stuff of like, why aren't people like, the way things are in Canada? And now it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
funny because I spent so much time outside of Canada that I come back to Canada and I'm like, oh, it's so frustrating. Like some of these things are so frustrating. Like, for example, Canada just has like the slowest speed limits. Like they're so strict in like construction zones and there'll be nobody working and you just have kilometers and kilometers of this slow construction zone. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
nobody would be following these rules if I was in Mexico right now. Like I kind of wish there was somebody that was like brave enough to just go a little bit faster. And I'm not quite there
Right.
because speeding tickets can be so expensive, but it's kind of interesting how we can sort of experience this like you go to a place and you're like used to a certain way of things. So you kind of expect it or
Mm-hmm.
want it to be that way. And then you can kind of experience that in reverse as well. Like sort of this like,
Yeah.
oh, why is my home country not like this?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I think that, when I first moved away from the UK and I really began to kind of become aware of, sort of the very particular mindset people can have there sometimes. And I have always found that a little bit frustrating, that this sort of this attitude of like, this is the way that we do things around here and we can't adapt, we can't change. And then you come out to somewhere like Colombia where everybody is just like, um, adapting and changing on a daily basis to the environments around them and doing it with a smile. So yeah, for sure. I definitely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I can relate to that as well. And I'm curious, like from, I guess, the perspective of like, living there, I'm assuming, are you a resident in Colombia now?
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've been a resident for about coming up on 2 years now, I think.
Okay, awesome. Was it pretty straightforward to like, go through the process of getting residency so you were able to kind of, have a bank account and then operate a business like from a legal standpoint?
Yes, I mean, I think it was particularly straightforward because I was already in the process of getting married. So, I met someone, I fell in love with them, decided that I wanted to stay here. And I think that here in Colombia, at least, when you have that marriage certificate, that does open up a lot of doors to you. Having said that, there are a lot of people who come in here to invest either in property or to invest in business, and it's pretty straightforward as well, I think, to obtain maybe not residency straight away, because you need to have spent a certain number of years in the country for residency, but at least to obtain, your initial visa that will allow you to build those years up. However, if you are just somebody who's like an independent worker who decides that they want to, migrate to Colombia, then it is a little bit more challenging, because you basically need to be able to prove that you're offering a skill in this country that no local Colombian can offer. And I think that's pretty standard for most countries to have a migration policy of that kind of variety.
Yeah, for sure. I think
Yeah.
that's the same as like Canada and the US, which I'm most familiar with.
Right.
Are there any other than kind of, you talked about like integrating with the culture and kind of accepting that things are going to be a little bit different and trying to kind of, get to know the people, the language. Do you find there's any other kind of, challenges or things that you learn from, running your business abroad?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a number of different things we could talk about here, but I think noise is always a challenging thing in Colombia, right? It's funny because we were in an ancestral medicine ceremony this weekend up in the mountains, just in the middle of nowhere, these beautiful views out across the mountains and valleys of Antioquia. And of course, there's somebody in the property opposite sort of blasting reggaeton out at, 1 a.m. It's just, everybody's there in their sort of this very deep kind of internal personal journey. And yeah, I mean, that's just Colombia at the end of the day. There's always some kind of noise going on. There's always street vendors, shouting on their megaphones. Here we've had the interesting experience of, during the middle of class, we have sort of bands of singers who come and set up their speaker literally right outside the studio door and start playing to the tower block opposite. And at that point, you've just got to be like, okay, it's Shavasana, let's switch the music off. Let's just listen to what they've got to offer. And it's kind of cool, in a way, you've just got to adapt to things and flow with them and not fight against them, I think. So yeah, for sure. Noise is definitely a challenging one here in Colombia.
Yeah, for sure. I've been back in Canada since the middle of July, and it's funny because it's the exact opposite here. And both my husband and I's families live you know, like in areas where there's people nearby, like not a farm or anything, but not in like a city center. And it's just completely silent here, like most of the time. There's just not that type of noise. And I'm so used to like, oh, if you hear like a big truck or like somebody selling something on the street, that's just like pretty normal for Latin America. And it's funny because you're like, oh, there's like no noise happening here. Like people would never play, reggaeton at like 1 a.m. here. Like people would be
Yeah.
so upset if they did that. It's just such a different vibe.
Like they want to hear J Balvin at 1 a.m. They obviously
Oh,
haven't spent enough time out here in Colombia.
I mean, I would be
Um,
like feeling right at home, but I think the rest of the people would be like, what on earth is this?
it's just a very different concept of like public space, right? I mean, here in Colombia, public space is for whatever you want it to be, right? So if you want to blast your music as loud as you want to, it's considered, okay, it's my right. This is a public space. I can do what I want. Which I think is just a very different kind of attitude to public space in, maybe in Canada and parts of Europe and whatnot, where people are like, well, I don't want to bother the neighbors. And I don't want to, I don't think people think about these things in the same way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it always makes me smile a little bit with those when I think about those experiences because it just makes me feel kind of like a home away from home of being in, places like Panama and Mexico and stuff like that.
For sure.
But yeah, definitely, something to learn within a business and especially a yoga studio. And I think that just kind of, I mean, you could go like yell at the people making music at this on the
I
street,
could.
but like, why not just kind of be like, okay, we'll turn off our music and we'll just kind of adapt to it. It's like you can kind of flow
Yeah.
with it or you can fight against it.
Exactly. And, I mean, I think that's just a lesson about sort of adapting to other cultures in general as well. There needs to be a bit of give and take. And if it's not something that's for you, I get it as well. There are some people who come to Latin America and they're like, well, it's nice. It's nice for a vacation, but it's not somewhere I can live. And that's also fine. There's nothing to keep you kind of tied down here if you don't want to adapt and live in that kind of new environment, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And so I feel like here's a good place to wrap up. I'm curious if you can share a little bit about where people can go to find you, maybe learn about your programs, if they're thinking about maybe doing something online or maybe going to be traveling to Colombia sometime in the near future. Where can they go to find all that information?
For sure. So our name is pretty unique. It's Flying Tree Yoga. So just imagine a tree that's flying. There's a whole story behind that I won't get into now. But if you just search for Flying Tree Yoga online, you'll find our website. The English section has all of the information about our class times, our training programs, our internship program for yoga teachers, which we didn't really get into, but that's another place where teachers can come and develop their own unique vision of what it means to be a yoga teacher. And of course, the Spanish language course as well. So there's that. And then we also have a dedicated website for our internships programs, which is yogainternships.com. Or just type in yoga internships into a search engine and it'll come up as well.
Amazing. I'll make sure there's links to all of that in the show notes as well, so people can easily check it out. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. This has been such a pleasure.
My pleasure. It's been lovely to chat with you today.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Andrew Singer. If you are interested in maybe traveling to Medellin, Colombia, to practice yoga or to learn how to teach in Spanish, definitely go check out what he's up to. If you want to learn how to teach yoga in Spanish from the comfort of your home, they still have a lot of programs being offered online, which is really great. So lots to go check out. And I hope that you've learned a lot just from his experiences of traveling and teaching and opening a business abroad and all of that good stuff. If you'd like to continue this episode of the podcast with us, Andrew and I talk about some of the business lessons that he's learned through his yoga career, and more specifically, things that he's learned from running a business abroad, because this is a pretty unique experience. So if you would like to hear that episode, you can head on over to patreon.com/MBM Yoga. I would love to have you there with me. And of course, a huge shout out to Offering Tree. Thank you so much to Offering Tree for sponsoring this episode of the show. Make sure you go check them out, offeringtree.com/MBOM. And then, of course, make sure you go and get access to that free on-demand course that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. I would love to see you there. All right, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.